Well, this is all about the populist spirit in Texas culture. To me, politics is not just about issues and candidates. It's also expressed through our music, cartoons, photographs, food, literature, movies, just all different aspects of our life. And I've often felt that progressives spend way too much time immersed on issues and details and debates and too little time enjoying the pub culture. Good drink, good food, good music, and good laughs. That's what creates a movement. That brings us together. Well, as the exhibit back behind us in here shows, I've always tried to put the party in politics. And that's why we're putting an emphasis on this joyous aspect of populism, the reception that will follow, great food, great beer and wine, all from Texas, of course, and this fabulous panel, Populism in Texas Culture. I'll just run down the group here and introduce everybody, and then we'll turn it over to Gary Hartman, our moderator. Ben Sargent. For most of us, a prize is something you find in a Cracker Jacks box. But thanks to inordinate talent, political insight, gutsiness, Ben Sargent hit the big one in 1982, winning the Pulitzer Prize for editorial cartooning, and was, by the way, a finalist again in 2001. He's one of America's jewels. Proud to have him. I must note that I personally resent cartoonists. It takes me about 3,000 words or so in my Hightower lowdown to get an issue discussed. But Ben does it in only a dozen words, and then he draws a picture of it. So it's really unfair to have to compete with people who have talent. But here's a guy who's always put his talent behind a strong populist message. Also, next to Ben is longtime pal of mine, Carolyn Mugar. Cambridge, Massachusetts would not generally be considered a hotbed of populist activity. But one part of it is because that's where Carolyn Mugar is. I've known her for many years as an activist, an advocate, an agitator on issues ranging from labor to toxics, Armenian rights to community empowerment. 1985, though, we connected on a common campaign, and that was Farm Aid. That was Willie Nelson's first Farm Aid, and much to the shock and amazement of everybody, Willie made a ton of money. So what to do with it became the question. Who to trust with it? Who would not steal it? So he found Carolyn Mugar, and that's how Farm Aid came to be based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She is smart, she is creative, she's fun, and she is tireless, and she's going to be a jewel in our discussion here this afternoon. Alan Pogue, I first encountered Alan 30 years ago in the inaugural parade for Bill Clements, who'd been elected governor, Republican. And there was Alan, not officially in the parade, but he was walking right alongside Clements's limousine, snapping pictures of everybody all around. And Alan was unmistakable because he had long, straight hair all the way down to his butt and little pink hair clips attached to him. And I thought, he's going to get the shit beat out of him by the Secret Service here. Well, anyway. From his days in the Vietnam War, through his time living and marching with Texas migrant workers throughout South Texas and on into George W.'s Iraq War, Alan's been a frontline documentarian, photographer, and a populist activist as well. He's on the board, the advisory board here at the Wittliff Collections, and I've been proud to work with him over the years, going back to when I was editor of the Texas Observer, and we would put his photographs in there. And then, finally and tallest, Tom Pittman. Tom's a professor of banjoology, a storehouse of grassroots music, a man of wry and sly wit, a person of strong populist opinion, and a founding reptile of the renowned Austin Lounge Lizards. The Lizards played a major role in advancing my career. In 1990, running for re-election as Ag Commissioner, I took the Lizards on the road into East Texas with me. And as a result of that tour, I lost counties I had always won. And I was advanced right out of politics into the world of writing and commenting. I've never had the chance to thank you publicly and properly for that, Tom, but I do appreciate all of that. So let's go to our wonderful monitor here, moderator, Gary Hartman. He's the director of the Center for Texas Music History here, and by the by, they've got their latest publication out that has a relevant article in it, Woody Guthrie and the Christian Left. All the stars are aligning here to be perfect. He doesn't just talk music, Gary also plays it. He's been in some of the finer bars here in San Marcos and Austin, and not just under the table. He's actually been on the stage with groups like the Texas Swing Kings and the Lone Star Swing. So join Gary Hartman and the whole panel here. Thank you. Take it away.
Thank you, Jim. Well, I'm very pleased to be here today, and I'm certainly proud to be part of a celebration of Jim, a man who tells us the truth even if we don't want to hear the truth. And he usually does it in a humorous way, so that is always a good thing as well. Thanks for your kind words about the Center for Texas Music History, too, Jim. I'm very proud of it, and at the risk of a shameless plug on behalf of the Center, I debated whether to do this, but since Jimmy sang a couple of Woody Guthrie songs earlier, I did bring some copies of the Journal of Texas Music History that we publish, and it has an article in there about Woody Guthrie and populism, directly relevant to what we have going on today. In fact, it talks about Woody Guthrie and the Christian left movement of the 1930s, back then when the fundamentalist Christians, many of them, believed that Christ's teachings came closer to embracing some of the socialist principles of distributing wealth equally and that sort of thing. So if you want a copy of that, I've got that up here. But thank you for that. And we discussed some ground rules for this panel today. And we want everybody to have fun. We want to keep it high energy and keep things moving. But Jim and I talked about some rules. I'm gonna go through the panel here, this distinguished group of folks, and I'm going to ask each one of them a question. And they'll have 3 or 4, maybe 5 minutes to respond. And I'll go through the panel a couple of times. And then we will open it up toward the end to questions from the audience. We will do that. But we'll save the Q&A from the audience till the second half of the panel, if that's okay with everyone. Now, we also talked about whether we should have a gong or a flashing light or something to let someone know that they've gone on too long. We couldn't find a gong, but I did find a roll of duct tape in case anybody talks for too long. Now, Jim would hasten to add that duct tape could apply to me, too, if I go on for too long, so I won't do that. But I will ask the panelists if we could keep the responses to about 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll get through a couple of questions each. And if you feel like engaging each other on any of these, of course, feel free to do that. And then we'll get some input from the audience. So thank you all for being here. I'm very honored to be part of this. Carolyn, I'm going to start with you. We're not going to go in any particular order, but I will start with you. What you've done with Farm Aid is absolutely remarkable. It's very rare that an annual event can become a household name that everybody knows and become a household name almost immediately. Everyone knows what Farm Aid is. You know immediately when someone talks about that, you know what it is, you know what purpose it serves, and so on. Part of that is, I think, part of it is because of people like Willie Nelson and other folks that you've brought in. You've really done a good job of focusing that. How could you connect the needs of farmers, the cause of farmers, the plight of farmers, really, with a broader need of urban workers, college students, inner city families, folks like that? How could you connect Farm Aid and what it does for farmers more broadly with the needs of urban folks and others?
Well, first of all, I just have to make a few corrections.
Okay.
So we'll just start this off peppery. You know, Willie Nelson really started Farm Aid, and Willie set the tone for all of us. Anybody associated with Farm Aid, anybody who knew anything about it, he saw something wrong in the country, and he didn't just say, that's a darn shame. He used all of his abilities to stand up and say, we've got to do something. And when Willie comes forward with that kind of commitment, there's just about nothing you can't do. And it's just about no reach that you can't get to, because Willie has a reach that is beyond any of us, any of what we can anticipate. Nobody could ever imagine when Willie left Nashville, you know, kind of like at the end of his rope, when Bill, however long ago it was, and he came to Texas and he united rednecks with hippies, right? And there was no one else doing that anywhere. And you never saw those same people under a same tent. And that's exactly what Willie did with Farm Aid. He created a big tent, and he set a mood so that people felt free to come together in ways that they hadn't been coming together. And they felt free to farmers that sometimes disagreed with each other. Not just farmers, but farmers and eaters. Anybody who was cared, as Willie says, if you eat, you're part of agriculture. And everybody, Willie is, I keep telling people, you know, with communicators on board like we have, which is Willie Nelson, and then soon after, Neil Young and John Mellencamp joined Willie, and then about 12 years ago or something, Dave Matthews came on board. And there's 4 of the most extraordinary communicators in the country there. And there's just about nothing you can't get to when you've got those kinds of people on board. And Willie, we really followed Willie's lead completely when we started, and we do still to this day. And that is, Willie is an extremely respectful listener. That's where he gets his wealth of insights, obviously. And he listens to people, and as Farm Aid proceeded, we listened to people in the countryside. We went out and we listened to farmers, and we brought people together. And then Farm Aid sort of operated at first particularly as kind of a stage and a sound system. We gave farmers more of a voice. We gave them a louder voice, and we gave them a stage to stand on, and a better loudspeaker system and some lights and stuff. And so it really kind of provided an opportunity for the family farmer to come forward, which in turn gave a lot of family farmers hope that they didn't have before that. And I'm not really ever going to get to your question, so don't worry. But but I would like to say that I think that that kind of a connection that Willie gave farmers, they felt like someone was listening. And we've heard from so many farmers over the years. We have so many letters from people saying that, Willie, you gave me the courage and the strength to carry on, and they would have quit farming. But Willie, they felt that through Willie there was like this electric current. You know, Willie was listening to them, their voice was being heard, and their concerns were out there among people, and people cared. And Farm Aid was an opportunity for people to care, because people came forward with a lot of money. And it really helped farmers, and it also helped farmers in fact, and it helped farmers in terms of where they could operate from emotionally and politically, because that kind of connection is, you can't buy that kind of connection. And that's what Willie really gave people. And I want to say something at the outset here. There's 2 people in this audience which should be up here, but I'm gonna drag them up if I have to drag them physically at some point. But they'll come up here in terms of questions and answers. Bill Wittliff, have you heard of him? Bill Wittliff was at Farm Aid way before I was. Bill knew Willie from years ago and had just worked on a film with Willie, and he wrote country. And so Bill had been out in the countryside and found a lot of the people that we ended up talking to at the very beginning of Farm Aid to find out what really was going on in the countryside. And Bill had foraged for those people, and he had dug for that wealth, and he really is at the foundation of Farm Aid. And Glenda Yoder, with whom I have worked now for 20 years, Glenda, stand up. Wave your hand. Glenda, Glenda is the heart, soul, and I should say mind of Farm Aid. So anyway, I just want to refer to you, for you to know them so that we can include them in any of the conversation. So I'm so glad I could answer your question.
Well, we appreciate everything that you guys are doing. Well, I'm going to jump around a little bit. Tom Pittman of the Lounge Lizards. I think most of you in here have heard the Lounge Lizards at some point in your life, and if you haven't, you need to get out there and hear them, because you don't really know Texas music unless you listen to the Austin Lounge Lizards. As those of you who do know the Lounge Lizards, you know that they are not afraid to skewer just about anyone or anything, and they always do it in a very, very clever way. And the great thing, I thought about this on the panel, is that Tom is the most deadpan member of the band up there. So I think it's perfectly ironic and suitable that he be part of this panel, because I've never heard him talk about the humor behind the band, and today we get a chance to do that. Tom, humor, and you guys are so adept at this. How is it safe always to use humor when we're dealing with serious issues? I mean, in many cases in a populist movement or a populist cause, it's born out of suffering, real human suffering. But sometimes humor can be a relief. But is it ever inappropriate? Is it always a good tool?
Well, for what we do, it's never inappropriate because I guess there are things that there are places we have never gone. Like people are asking us when David Koresh got burned out and the massacre. Well, when are you going to write a song about that? Well, I don't think we're going to. But there's humor is the best way to me. You say, is it ever inappropriate? I think it's always appropriate for us if we've got a statement to make to couch it in those terms. That's what we do best, and that's what people expect of us. If we tried to come out and pound somebody over the head over something, I think they would be very disappointed, and I think we'd be, that's not what we do. That's not what we do well. There's a time and a place for that, but that's not what people come to see us for. What I think we do best is to, sort of work out of the sense of irony. Find things that are out there that just seem so absurd, and just point out the absurdity about it. And unfortunately, on both sides of the political spectrum, there are a number of people that I call the irony impaired. I was on a fundraiser at KUT one time a long time ago, and Cornell Hurd has a song called "It's All Lunch Meat to Me," and he's talking about all these exotic birds, the flamingos and the spotted owls, and it's all lunch meat to me. And I thought it was really cool, and I still do. But we got 2 phone calls. One from, one of the founders of SOS called and said he thought that was great. But we also got a call from the irony impaired who said that such trash should not be on the air. And okay, there you have it. But not everybody gets irony. You do with it what you can. And but speaking strictly personally, I think when people come to us, that's what they're expecting. I mean, we've carved out a niche, and so it gives us a head up. We have played some bluegrass festivals where we kind of did not really want to go out to the CD table after the show. It was we don't play very many bluegrass festivals anymore, and probably never should have. But anyway, well, that's kind of where we. I don't know if that answered the question or not. I'm beginning to see that that's not really the point of this, is to answer the question. But anyway, humor is a medium, and I think for a lot of purposes, it's the best medium. I will say one more thing. About a year and a half ago, I discovered that the mute button on the remote control. So I decided that it might be okay to start watching television again after 35 years or whatever it was. They didn't even have remote controls last time I was watching TV. Anyway, I've started watching the Daily Show and the Colbert, and Colbert is just solid wall-to-wall irony there. I just love that. But one of the Fox commentators was excoriating Jon Stewart he was saying, well, you ought to either just be a comedian and let it go at that, or if you want to be a social commentarian or commenter, anyway, if you want to do social comment, you should do that. But you just can't do both. And Stewart was, what? What better way to do social comment? And I agree completely. That's the other people have their ways of doing it, but that's what works for me. And when I want to see some social commentary, that's the way I enjoy it the best. Just to find, take an argument and just point out the absurdity of it. Oh, I also want to thank Ben Sargent did a cover on one of our albums, and want to thank you for that. We discovered years ago that the albums that we do that do not have our picture on the cover sell way better than the ones that do. So Ben's made us a lot of money that way by keeping us off the cover of the Small Minds album. Anyway.
Well, thank you, Tom. And speaking of Ben, I've been a big admirer of Ben's work for many, many years, long before I met him. In fact, I didn't meet you till today. But since Tom referred to you, I'm jumping around here, and I'll go to Ben next. And I agree that humor is one of the most effective ways, and that's one of the great things about Ben Sargent's work, is there is always humor. There's that direct, strong impact, the statement that his work makes, but there is almost always humor in it. And what I want to ask you, Ben, and you can choose to answer this or not. Doesn't matter to me. So.
It's not relevant.
It seems to me that political cartoonists and the news media in general are barreling down this road toward more and more toward infotainment and away from more substantial stuff. And I believe that your work has always remained focused on substantial issues. You've done it with a good sense of humor, lighthearted and so on, but it's always been something relevant. It's not reaching for the lowest common denominator. And so there's obviously some real integrity there. Is there someone who was a role model to you or an inspiration for that?
Well, thank you, Gary, and thanks to Jim Hightower. Is that on? Oh, we're out of luck.
Here.
Get closer. I don't think it's on.
I don't think it is.
Is there a switch?
Not that I can find.
The green light is on.
Got it? All right, now can you hear me? All right. Well, yeah, thank you for inviting me to this, and I know when Jim invited me and said I was going to be on a panel on populist culture, and I said, Jim, I don't even know what that is. Is that like is that like NASCAR? Is it is it Dancing with the Stars? I mean, is it the same as popular culture? And maybe that's partly because I'm still not, although I've been a devoted follower of Jim Hightower for many years, not exactly sure what populism is, because when you start thinking about it, it's everyone for the last 500 years has appropriated that word to mean what they're doing. Everybody from the Anabaptists and the levelers in the 16th century up through the teabaggers today, they all call themselves populists. So it's sort of a label that's gotten diluted. But if you're talking about, if you want to talk about social equity and justice and just pursuing policies that give the most people the most opportunity to arrange their own lives and to take as much part as they can in our political and economic systems, then I guess I'm a populist. But labels are loose and fuzzy. You asked me about people who had been influences on my thought, and my number one thing in my 35 years of editorial cartooning, number one was filling that big hole every day on the editorial page. And if some days it was, if I could just think of anything to put in there, I would have put it in there. But I saw myself on that editorial page as an opinion journalist, just like the guys that were writing columns, like Jim. And you forgot, when you were comparing your work and mine, you forgot about the 150,000 crosshatches, that you didn't have to do. But in my trade, I know there's sort of two currents of approaches among political cartoonists, and one there are some, and there's some of them are very good cartoonists who see themselves as sort of the pictorial equivalent of a late night comic, and they see what the biggest headline is every day and do a joke about it, and a lot of them are very funny, but there's no punch there, there's no message, and there's no reason really to be on an opinion page. So I've always sort of considered myself more of a crowd with cartoonists who think of themselves as doing something ideological and trying to advance a view, or trying to point out the ironies and the absurdities of things that are going on in the public arena. And people like that, friends of mine who I've admired very much, would include like Patrick Oliphant, Paul Conrad, Don Wright, and people who regard themselves first as opinion journalists, and they're trying to get across a point. And so I guess those were some of the, if not influences, at least people that I admired and sort of aligned what I was doing with.
Well, thanks, Ben. Well, cartoons, when they're done well, can pack a powerful punch, and obviously your track record in that is amazing. And it's the same. I'm gonna ask Alan now to comment, because I think there's a lot of similarity there. You're doing photography and documenting populism, populist culture, and the world around us through photography. So in a sense, you're trying to capture that same single image that speaks volumes. And others, of course, before you, Russell Lee and others have done that. You fill some mighty big shoes. How do you think in your career, and again, you can answer this, or you can have any sort of response you want that you think is linked to populist culture. How do you think the process of all this has changed for you over the years? Or perhaps have you seen it change even before you began working as a professional to the present day?
Well, a lot has changed and remained the same. But as we all know, really, the internet has changed everything. YouTube and all these other sites you can go to. I remember I was asked to go to Iraq the first time in 1998. I got my first laptop. I got home from Iraq, I think it was July of '98. I had an email from some human rights group in South Africa wanting a picture from Iraq. Well, okay, I scanned that picture that would suit their purpose and emailed it back to them all the way to South Africa in an instant. Wow. I mean, you know, forget FedEx. Thank you, FedEx, for everything you do. But so it's everything is so fast, and everything is so accessible. If I mean, with the internet searches, you can find out so much so quickly about anything. But there's an underlying current that is so subtle that a lot of people don't think about it, and that's the politics of aesthetics, the politics and the economics of aesthetics. When I got back from Vietnam, and that was a formative influence on my life, I started taking pictures as a combat medic and as a chaplain's assistant. So I didn't have any formal training in photography. I came back and I taught myself, and I started working with the underground press. But what was I doing? I was photographing gay liberation and women's liberation, black liberation. I spent the night with the Black Panthers in Oakland. Only white guy there, I tell you. It was different back when they were holding shotguns and up against the bunkers. And so I was covering all of these things, and so I was asked to photograph women in the Texas labor movement in the 30s and 40s in Texas, a subject of which I knew nothing about. But I was interested, and I wanted to do it, and I knew that Russell Lee was here, and that he was one of the most revered documentary photographers on the planet. And so I went over to see him in 1976, and he was as gracious and warm a person as you'd ever want to meet. And he told me who to talk to at the Library of Congress, the National Archives. I went there. I spent 40 hours a week from 8 o'clock in the morning until they kicked me out, looking through thousands of pictures in the Library of Congress. They have the Farm Security Administration photograph I like to show and tell. This is one of many books on the Farm Security Administration. They were documenting America to show everyone how people in farmers in particular in rural areas were suffering and other things. And so I talked to Russell Lee, and after that, I would go over and see him every chance I had anything new to show him. I would take it over there, because although he wasn't very talkative about photography, I mean, in the way that we're used to making a lot of words about stuff, so I'd have to watch his face really closely, and he'd be looking at one of my photographs, and I would just see the emotion cross it or not. How was he reacting to this? And that told me reams. But he finally, in 1979, asked me if I'd like to go to the Missouri Photojournalism Workshop. His old friend Cliff Odom was running it. They brought in the big-time photographers from all over the country. National Geographic, Sports Illustrated, the biggest newspapers, to have us for a week pick a topic and do a photo essay on it, and boy, it was intense. But one day I was coming across the lawn and I saw Cliff Odom, and he stopped me and he said, "Oh, well, I see that Russell Lee has sponsored your, being here." I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, you'll never make any money taking pictures the way Russell Lee did." And he was serious, because really this is about advancing yourself in a career in status quo photography. Careerism in the status quo is what it's all about. If you want to make money, you can't do it Russell Lee's way. Well, that certainly gave me pause. Not that I would abandon what Russell Lee was doing in his point of view, but over the course of the week and talking to the National Geographic photographers, I remember they had a slideshow. They were making fun of the Chinese, making fun of them because they were riding bicycles. And so I had a big argument with a guy from National Geographic over that. But the next day, I was talking about the U.S. involvement, the direct involvement of the United States in selling opium, flying out of Laos and Cambodia and selling it in Hong Kong. So then I got into a big argument with the executive from Kodak. But then the National Geographic guy comes in and says, "Well, he's right. Actually, yes, the Air Force is flying opium to Hong Kong. I know because I saw it." So the Kodak guy had to shut up and go away. But then when they're having a slideshow of National Geographic things, and they were doing a slideshow of monks, and the guy said, "Here, I'll show you all the stuff National Geographic would not run." Well, it was the monks horsing around doing this and that. It was anything that didn't fit the stereotype. So what he was telling me is, you can do anything you want, but if you take pictures that don't fit the stereotype, they're not going to run. Well, I got back to Austin, and I didn't tell Russell Lee any of this. And he's such a nice guy. And he's not naive, but he's just such a nice guy. I wasn't going to say, "Thank you for all the negative lessons I learned." But I'm going to have nothing to do with the mainstream media. Forget it. So I took pictures for the Texas Observer and the Underground Press. But the other thing is, when I got back from, when I was in Iraq, I was in Baghdad in December when the U.S. bombed it. Bill Clinton bombed Baghdad. I went all over Baghdad, and I took pictures in a lot of hospitals, on the streets, grocery store clerks blown up, grandmothers, children. Nobody would run those pictures. I was sending them from Amman, Jordan to the American Statesman. They would not run them because they didn't fit the stereotype. These weapons are weapons of mass destruction, and we were using them and all over the place. Believe me, they kill indiscriminately. And that wasn't the official story. So I could run them. I could see them run in the Underground Press, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, the Texas Observer, and weekly newspapers, but not the mainstream press, not my hometown newspaper. I was the only American photographer in Baghdad in December of 1998. So that tells you something. But I know I don't want to talk too long, but I've got to get this other thing in. So what happens? Okay, there's this moment. We had the WPA. You had the Farm Security Administration. They were doing all of this great work and sponsoring all kinds of artists, writers, all over the country. You know, of course, there's the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and all of that. And we could do that again. We could do it tomorrow, you know. We could put that money behind people who are going to talk about the struggles of ordinary people. But something happened. At the Museum of Modern Art, you had Edward Steichen. And Edward Steichen did this wonderful book in 1953 in a show. It's called The Family of Man. Family of Man, one of the greatest exhibits. Well, you know, he retired, and then we got John Sarkowski. And John Sarkowski is into formalism and alienation. And he sponsored people like Diane Arbus, Gary Winogrand, people that don't make any sense, and people that, it's what I call sideshow photography. You know, the whole world is like a freak show. And that had a damaging effect on photography all over this country and to this day. You know, that photography is not about explaining the world and bringing us together. I mean, yes, there's lots of alienation out there. Sure there is. But there's also reasons for it, you know. And maybe because on the other side of Russell Lee and the farm security situation, you had this ridiculous thing of Richard Avedon taking pictures of people in the West. It's what I call pseudo-documentary photography, where you turn everything into a freak show. You know, like, you're going to do something about beekeepers. So they found the weirdest looking guy that was a beekeeper, because they did a casting call for this picture. They picked him because he was bald and tall, then covered him with royal jelly, put bees all over him, and then posed him in an awkward position to make the oddest sort of picture you could find. I mean, what an insult to documentary photography. I mean, of course he's a New York fashion photographer, so what do you expect? And lastly, I would say André Kertész. André Kertész was Henri Cartier-Bresson's older, wiser brother. André Kertész was once asked by a magazine, what book would you give to other photographers for Christmas? Every other photographer they asked said, oh, well, my book, I just published such and such a book. André Kertész said, well, of course, I'd give them Das Kapital. Because you can't photograph the world if you don't understand it. You know, and that would be their textbook. So with that, I'll close off.
Thank you, Alan. I think that's a good reminder that culture, whether it's populist culture or any other type of culture, can be manipulated like that by providing certain bits of information or withholding other bits, as I think is part of what you're suggesting. Good. Well, we're gonna go through the panel here again, and I'll pose another question, which you feel free to ask or answer or not answer, however you'd like to do that. And I did get a little note that in the interest of time, so that we'll have enough time left for Q&A from the audience, that we try to roll through this a little more quickly. So, and Carolyn, I'll start with you. I want to get back to that thing about Willie bringing together rednecks and hippies, because that's kind of part of what Willie is famous for in the Austin music scene and elsewhere. But I think in terms of Farm Aid, it's very interesting, because we typically think of farming folk as more conservative, probably leaning more toward the Republican Party. But it seems that maybe what you guys are doing and what Willie has done shows that there's much more to the picture than that. And I wanted to see what your take is on that.
Well, actually, I'd like to answer your first question now. No.
What was it? Yeah, what was it? I don't remember. Could you tell me what
No, the first question was, I forget what it was, but it was something about what do farmers have in common with urban workers. And actually, it's all to do with this second question, too. It's all the same thing. But, I mean, and I honestly can't remember the question you just asked me. So
that makes two of us.
But I think what has happened in food and agriculture is kind of this amazing transformation from people feeling distant from their food to feeling much closer, and it has brought people, farmers and urban people are much closer today than they were, and it's kind of like Willie bringing hippies and rednecks together in a way, because people, I think, it's much more across the board, the interest in food and farming, and some of it is because of the horrors that have been presented to us through corporate controlled agriculture. I mean, people recognize that we have terrible diabetes scandal, and we also have obesity, which Michelle Obama has committed herself to trying to do something about, and it's exactly the same parallel, the rise of those two horrors parallel exactly the rise of the control of corporate concentration in agriculture. So it's something that Willie, being who Willie is, and the other three guys too, John and Neil and Dave, they are at the in the very best sense of things, they're outlaws, and that is it's not that they say that you can't abide the law, but you got to play outside the law. You have to play the audience that comes to these many concerts. Farm Aid has been around 25 years. We've had, I think, 23 concerts, but they go all the time to these guys' concerts as they go to your concerts. And people are looking for something that is interpreted for them in a very different way than it is in a straightforward way. And they get a feel of how things are possible, and they understand that people can come together in ways that haven't been necessarily handed to them by politics in this country per se. I mean, the experience of going to a concert does dissolve a lot of barriers between people. You find people behaving in very strange ways at concerts. We applaud that. We encourage it, and it does bring about an opportunity for people to feel that they are close to each other. I mean, one of the things that's extraordinary today that's happening in food and agriculture is the rise of urban agriculture. Not just the ability of people to buy food at farmers markets and community-supported agriculture, but also there's people growing foods in cities, which makes people feel much more connected. It doesn't mean that we don't still have the same tremendous problems in the countryside that Farm Aid is dealing with all the time in our work, our day-to-day work, but I think people have a far greater empathy with farmers, recognize the importance of the family farmer. Family farmer today is seen more as a hero than they were as a victim, and we're looking to them for the ingenuity that we know they have, that we all desperately need. They have the solutions. Willie's always known that. He's always respected people, and the people that are close to the problem have the best solutions, and those are family farmers, and we've always looked to them for the solutions. And I think finally we have something happening that resembles an open door in Washington. You know, at least we can get our foot in that door. We can deliver the petitions in person instead of leaving them, you know, on the sidewalk. And it's a lot better atmosphere right now in terms of being able to work with some people there. So I have no idea what your question was, but that's where I was rambling to. So take it away.
Thank you, Carolyn. No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for that. And I'm gonna come back to Tom again. And Tom, I love the idea of the image of the lizards being outlaws. I like that now, and especially as you guys tool around in your minivan to the pediatrician and elsewhere.
Yeah.
I do think that part of what Carolyn was saying is going up against corporations, and I know that the music business, of course, is filled with those sort of challenges. You're trying to deal with major record labels. Fortunately, in recent years, there's been this move toward independent record labels and independent booking agencies and so on. So you don't necessarily have to go that route anymore. But are there any stories you want to share with us, humorous or otherwise, about the lounge lizards running into corporate recording America?
Well, actually, that's never been a problem for us. They've never been interested in us in any way. There was a guy, well, I won't use his name, but there was a guy that was quoted in the Statesman one time about, well, they keep wanting me to do this and wanting me to do that, but I will never go there. Well, I was thinking, I don't think they've ever even talked to you about it, but anyway, but yeah, that has really kind of gone away. And I guess distressed is the right word for it. Even Rounder Records, which is a 40-year-old independents, put out just wonderful catalog spanning spectrum of Cajun, Zydeco, blues, bluegrass, everything, country, vintage country. Even put James Hand's album out not long ago, and not long ago had Robert Plant and Alison Krauss. Anyway, with all of that success, they just sold out to another. After 40 years, they just sold out to Concord Group, which I'd never heard of, and I found that really distressing because a label we were on, Sugar Hill, was at one time very competitive in that market. They were, the two of them, at least in bluegrass circles, were kind of it. They were certainly the pinnacles of those anyway. And they sold out to a group, the Welk Group, which is Lawrence Welk's children, who had already bought Vanguard Records, which is a wonderful label. Of Joan Baez's early work was on Vanguard as Doc Watson. Aligning yourself with Vanguard seemed like a good deal, but ultimately these were what labels used to be. But after they sold out to the corporations, things changed pretty quickly. And I don't know, we were never really courted by the big ones, but even the little ones are going away. And I don't do too much hand wringing about that. We're just Conrad and our guitar player and I were just yesterday trying to figure out all of our revenue streams are changing now, and we don't really, we've always dealt on precedents about what do we do with money that comes from this source. Well, we use it for that. Well, those sources are drying up and more sources are coming in. It's kind of cool in a way that we get a check whenever we choose to draw it out. There's an outfit called TuneCore that handles our online sales, and I personally don't even know how to buy a song online. I've never tried. Being on the radio, I kind of don't need to. People mail me stuff all the time faster than I can listen to it anyway. But anyway, these revenue streams are coming up that we don't know what to make of it, but kind of glad they're there. But they do allow the musicians to be a lot more independent. And I don't think I was talking to another Tom Ellis, Tom, we were talking about that the other day, that there'll probably never be any more Beatles or Elvises or any of that. That everybody can put out the music they want to put out, and everybody can buy the music they want to buy. And the whole music in EMI, a major record distributing company, music distributing company, is kind of on the blocks right now to be sold at pennies on the dollar. Stuff, Michael Jackson's stuff was in there. Just huge labels are now just wandering around wondering can we get anything for this record company anymore? And we were wondering if maybe that's why Rounder chose to sell out right now. It's because they see the handwriting on the wall that 5 years from now what they have may not be worth anything. And so they decided to cash out while they could. I don't know. I think your question was how has that impacted on us? And I don't really know. It's kind of still evolving. And the online sales are kind of cool, and that you don't have to do anything. I also handled our mail orders. If you mail us a check, or they don't even do that anymore. That comes by PayPal. But I'm the guy that puts it in the envelope and sends it to you. Well, to do that, I've got to have a stock over here. I've got to have every CD we've ever had. I've got to have it where I can go get it and put it in an envelope. Well, this online stuff, you don't have to have anything. It just goes out. You don't have to pay anybody to press it. It's cool. But it's but the fact that it's so easy that everybody can do it means that I don't know. I find that at least philosophically refreshing and very good that people can make the music that they want to make. They can put it out the way they want to put it out, and the people that want to buy it can buy it that way. So everybody can make a minimal amount of money, at least, doing the music they really want to do. The days of the producers that tell you how to comb your hair and how to dress and all of that stuff, those are pretty much over. I mean, there's a few Lady Gagas out there, I guess, whoever that is. But even at that level, I think, I mean, who would advise her to dress like that anyway? I mean, that's got to be her own choice.
Now, careful what you say about Lady Gaga. That happens to be my musical mentor, the role model. So.
Well, that explains a lot.
It does, doesn't it? It does.
Anyway.
Well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Well, music obviously has always been such an important part of the populist culture.
Let me
Okay.
Since I brought this visual aid along, I want to use it. This is, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old stuff, but that we didn't see coming either. Kathy Mitchell, that runs the local branch of Consumers Union, unbeknownst to us, was a fan of ours, and she contacted us one day and said, we got a project for you. We want you to write a song for us, and we're going to get a cartoonist to make a video, and she didn't use the word viral, but we later learned that was the idea, was that if you put up something that's entertaining enough, then it will spread on its own, and you don't have to pay anything for that. And this was in the infancy of it. Of course, we didn't have that kind of vision, but she did, and she made it happen. We wrote a song called "The Drugs I Need." In fact, she gave us the drugs. Well, no, not the. She gave us the topic, and that it was. This may be as close to the topic of that we're gathered here for as I'm going to get today, so I don't want to lose the thread, which could happen at any moment. Anyway, she was trying to put together a campaign to address a bill that was pending that would require pharmaceutical companies that if they had done some testing that did not come out favorably for them, that they had to publish that anyway. As it is, they run these tests, and if they prove that their drug is either not effective or is harmful, well, they just go find somebody else to run another test. And this can go on and on and on, and nobody knows that it's out there. Anyway, she was pushing for a law to make that happen, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't know whether that law ever passed or not, but anyway, she had us do a thing on the pharmaceutical industry, write a song, and the song we wrote was "The Drugs I Need." She got an outfit to do the cartoon for it. It went up. It went on the Today Show, and the day it went up, they crashed because they had so much demand. They didn't have the bandwidth to cover it. They went out and quadrupled their bandwidth in the first hour. Anyway. And it was huge for us, and it was the first time in our career we've done a lot of political commentary and things, but this is the first time we ever had any tangible sense that we were doing something that somebody saw, because in the first week 65,000 emails went to Congress about this, and that felt just really great. We've been trying to effect some change for 30 years, and finally it's somebody's. We have some tangible evidence that that's happening, and that's just we're talking about technology, how it's changing. Well, that's something we never would have caught on if somebody hadn't clued us into it, but we were glad to be in the vanguard of it. We've since done like 5 more of those for different consumers advocacy groups. Because anything that succeeds that well, everybody else gets on the bandwagon, so it's harder and harder to get noticed. So none of the rest of them have done as well as that first one, but we were really just thrilled that happened.
Yeah. It is amazing how technology has affected that, absolutely. Well, thanks, Tom, and Ben, I'm going to come back to you. As we all know, political cartoonists can lose their lives for the work that they do. What you do as a profession, not only does it do so much good, so does it have such a positive impact, but it can be dangerous work. And I don't know if you've ever run into a situation where you've been threatened or harassed or anything to that effect.
Yeah, it can be, and of course, and one thing that leaps to mind, of course, that everybody's mind is the Muhammad cartoons and the threats that were made. I mean, there are cartoonists in Europe who live under 24-hour security because of these cartoons they did. No, I mean, if you're a cartoonist in the United States, you really are in sort of a cocoon of the protections that our society affords and our laws afford, and you really have it pretty good. It's certainly if you're doing it every day for years, and you do get the calls and the letters and the emails, and a lot of them are pretty nasty. And you know, over the years, you develop a lot of snappy comebacks that are very effective.
For example.
One that I learned from an editorial writer we had years ago. He was on the phone in our office there, and he was obviously being roundly chewed out by somebody, and went on and on and on, and finally he said, well. He said, "You have a pencil and paper there," and he waited a second. He said, "Well, now take this down." He said, 600 North Michigan Avenue, Chicago, Illinois. And clearly the person said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "That's the address of the Goss Newspaper Products Company, and they'll be more than happy to sell you a printing press, and you can print your own goddamn newspaper." So you do sort of develop those things, but I know that you know, we have a trade group that meets every year, the Association of American Editorial Cartoonists, which one of our very few female members, Signe Wilkinson from Philadelphia, once described as an all-white, all-male drinking club that meets once a year, but which is mostly true. But anyway, it is the one sort of group of all the editorial cartoonists in the country, all 18 that are left. And but every year we try to bring in cartoonists from outside the United States. In fact, there is sort of a group that's sort of related to our group called Cartoonist Rights Network, that's run out of Washington, that is sort of an Amnesty International for editorial cartooning, and they find cartoonists abroad who are being persecuted, imprisoned, killed for their cartoons. These are just their cartoons, folks. You know? But and every year they single one out for a sort of an award for the most courageous one, and they do their technique is very much like Amnesty International. They try to bring pressure on these governments and these parties that are persecuting these cartoonists. But outside the United States and outside the Western democracies, yeah, it can be very hazardous to your health, and I always salute those guys and those women who are doing, you know, who are expressing their opinions in cartoons, and risking jail, risking, you know, I had a friend who was a cartoonist in Peru who he called me up one day and he said, well, I said, how you doing? He said, well, there are Army tanks all around my block, you know, and they're here for me. And although sometimes it happens in the United States too. My very good friend Ted Rall in New York City, whose cartoons you've probably seen, has done some very controversial cartoons. In fact, I think sometimes that's the main thing for him, is not expressing an opinion. It's gigging people, you know. But he does some very strong work. And after 9/11, he got crosswise with 9/11 widows of firemen and policemen who he thought were exploiting the tragedy that had happened to them to make money, and he did a cartoon expressing that. And I wasn't talking to him, but I was talking to a mutual friend of ours, and he said there were not tanks, but there were fire engines all around his house, and the firemen were coming up, and there was no fire. And
Yet.
so he was being harassed. But so, yeah, it can be dangerous outside of the protections that we have for expression, and I certainly salute the people that undergo that just to make those free expressions.
Sure. Well, thanks, Ben. I'll say the last question for Alan. And Alan, really, sort of along the same lines, you talked about some of the photos that you'd taken that are at least considered by some so controversial that they wouldn't even publish them here. And what a photographer does is similar in a way. You are putting out an image that has a profound amount of impact, So much so, again, that sometimes those are censored or banned altogether. Have you been in a situation where you have felt intimidated or threatened or anything like that?
Well, I'm not the only one, but I remember I was in my dark room. I was over at 17th and Guadalupe, Galleria Sin Fronteras, and I got a call from Marcus Schnaga with the SOS. He had to get over to, they were having the Senate was meeting over at the 15th and Guadalupe, I think, at what they call the Wurlitzer building. Said everybody on every side of the SOS controversy is there for the legislation is coming down to a vote. So I grabbed my camera and I ran over there, and I was taking pictures, and Gary Bradley screamed at me from across the rotunda, said he was going to come and take my camera and do mean things to me and this and that. And so he ran right up to me, and I was like, we were like ready to go. And I said, well, Gary, I've been studying martial arts for 30 years. Yeah, I'm honor bound to tell you this, you know. But if you know, do whatever you have to do, you know. And he turned around and went away.
I appreciate all of you being here, first of all. And I'd like to ask Carolyn, where does the money go that is raised? Does it go to individual farmers? Does it go to lobbying? Does it go to grants? Tell us how it's spent, okay?
Sure. I'm smiling at Bill because Bill and I have a joke about this, but actually the money, it's a really good question, and a lot of people ask it. The money goes to in a lot of different pockets. We have been prohibited originally, and still are, from giving money directly to farmers. The IRS said we can't because farmers are a business. Money cannot go directly to a business. So we have given for years and years to a variety of groups that are out in the countryside, which the very fact that these people exist I find extremely encouraging. Most people don't know these people. They don't know they exist. Bill, as I said, tipped us off in the very first place with folks from Iowa, from Prairie Fire, and there are many, many people doing unbelievably wonderful, courageous, smart, innovative work in the countryside, and these people are advocating for farmers. They work with farmers. They're finding better markets for farmers. So we give grants to, Glenda, how many organizations have we granted by now? I have no idea. Hundreds and hundreds of organizations. And the grants are often small amounts because we don't have large, huge, massive amounts of money to give out, because every year we go down to nothing. We operate kind of like Willie, rich, poor, rich, poor, rich, poor. We go right down to nothing before a concert. We have no idea how we're going to survive. Glenda and I have gotten used to it. Some of the new people find it very scary. But every year, as Willie always said, he said, look, Carolyn, if it comes down to it and we got no money, we can just go out into a field and hold a concert. And that is the truth, because the equity that these guys have, and I do say guys because it is the four men that I'm referring to, even though a lot of women have played at Farm Aid, they have tremendous equity, and the record companies know that, and they know that they've got nothing without the talent and the insights that these people have into our culture. But Farm Aid, so the money goes to grants, but not all the money goes to grants at all. Farm Aid has been very active. We kind of call ourselves an activist funder, in a sense, or an activist charity, because from the very beginning we've been active. We haven't just given the money out to people. We've been partners with those people that we grant. We are partners with those people. We work very closely with them, because our opportunity is to communicate perhaps more than a lot of these smaller groups. And when you put all them together, they do have a definite point of view and a direction and a vision. And our job is to get that vision out there and to get that point of view out there. So we spend money also on a lot of program work that we do. We have had a farmers hotline since day one. We pick up the phone, answer farmers' questions and problems. It's turned into something called the Farm Resource Network, which now has over 500 referrals. It is both a hotline that someone named Joel answers, or any of us answer it, but if Joel's busy. And it also is an online service for farmers now. So you can go to farmaid.org, and you can go to our Farmers Resource Network, and you can be hooked into a whole network of people out in the countryside that are working with farmers to find better markets, to find, we really founded this out of exasperation because we were so upset so often when a farm would call and say, you know what, my farm's on the auction block tomorrow. And you knew it was too late, and you would get an advocate connected to this person best you could, but it was too frustrating, and we said we've got to reach people before the crisis moment comes. So this is an attempt to reach farmers. We have a lot more outreach work to do with those services, but they are there, and we are reaching many, many farmers with those. We also have a whole staff. We have more staff than we ever used to have, and we do an awful lot of work with these farm groups. We have something that we've newly developed called homegrown.org. Now, do not go to homegrown.com because it is a porn site. And I don't want to see everybody starting to use their handhelds right now. Just hold on, you can do it later. But it's homegrown.org, and it is a social networking place online for people to go to with this incredible new fever and mainline interest of so many urban people of doing it yourself. And it's connecting those people with each other. A lot of those people are doing all kinds of urban farming. They're also doing all kinds of things for themselves, which is very much what farmers do. And it is giving people that sense of connection, and that sense of connection to where their food comes from also. So, and Glenda, what's the other great way that you have of describing where our money goes? What have I forgotten? I mean, so it's all about family farmers, and it's all about putting the family farmer up there as a strong, innovative person. And as Willie says, it's the bottom rung of the ladder, and without family farmers, we don't know what we have, so.
Thank you, Carol. Question?
Hi, my name is Rebecca Belmetero, and I'm running for State Board of Education, District 5. Thank you. And this question is really just a chance to plug that issue. But you did say things that were sort of remotely connected to the issue of culture, which is the topic of this panel. And it seems like in the past we've contributed great things from Texas to culture, like Farm Aid. But Tom, you mentioned the Daily Show and Colbert Report, and we got on the Daily Show and Colbert Report for having such a ridiculous State Board of Education. And it seems now Texas culture is just famous for being stupid.
Well,
And,
I think we've got Arizona now, so we...
They've taken the heat off, but I think when the board meets again on May 19th that it's going to flame up again. And so what would you suggest we could do to counteract this tragedy in our culture, aside from having a happy ending and getting rid of those people in November?
Well, I wish I knew. I mean, it really is a huge embarrassment, and I was thinking about the whole Arizona issue right now, but for somebody in Texas to boycott Arizona because of their Peckerwood politics is just sort of a pot calling the kettle black. I remember Molly Ivins used to be sort of proud of that only Louisiana was more Byzantine than we were. But, I don't know. Does anybody have an answer to that?
Yeah, maybe when the SBOE meets again, we can reclaim the crown of the Peckerwood crown. I noticed that even Rick Perry is nervous about having a similar law in Texas to the Kristallnacht law they have in Arizona now.
Another question? Anyone? Here's
Hi. I like to tell my students that there's a little bit of populist in every individual. And the previous panel said that we're becoming much more urban and much more suburban. So I want to ask you, do you think that this growing love of Texas food and growing love of Texas music and festivals all over the state all year long sort of invigorates a little bit of that populism in each one of us?
I think I've always thought it was interesting, particularly over the years since the progressive country music started back in the 70s, that every Texan I've known, and of course most of them were born or grew up in cities, some of them very large cities. But I think every Texan has in the back of his mind this fantasy that he grew up in in a tiny town and out on the farm, and that's very much like you say, it's very much a culture thing, and it's sort of the image of the culture that we have fashioned for ourselves, and I've always found that an interesting phenomenon.
Well, what I see that connects with the farm is a lot of farmers markets popping up all over. I mean, I think even more than ever. It's almost like back to 1972 or something. So that's I remember when I was working with the Underground Press, and people would drive to San Antonio to the farmers market at 3 o'clock in the morning or something, and all these people, farmers, farmers, they're out there with trucks, and you can buy stuff right off the pickup truck. And people would get together like a whole neighborhood and have an order, and we'd have a big old truck drive over there and pick it all up and bring it back and distribute it in our neighborhood. And I remember the first food co-op that I knew of way back then was the Milo Minder Binder Food Co-op. And that was just somebody selling food out of their living room. And then it took off from there. But I think that it kind of went down for a while, but then it's like resurged.
I'd say in answer to that too, I think any of these cultural events that do bring us all together can only be good. One thing I used to do was I would volunteer every time there was an election. I would go work at the polls, and and that was the most populist thing I think I've ever done, because you would go in there. There would be people from every walk of life, every political bent, and we were all working together very hard to get something done. And when it was all over, we went back our separate ways. But we all got to meet each other and work together. And anything, these festivals and entertainment things are good too, but working together is critical, I think, to spreading your culture.
No, I was just going to add that it should be noted that Jim Hightower was the one that tipped Farm Aid off about the whole farmers markets trend that hadn't developed, but he saw it coming, and he called up and he said, "You really got to fund this farmers market in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right?" And everybody's talking supply management and all these policy things, and Jim was saying, this is where it's going to be happening, and so we did, of course, because we would obey. Sages such as you, but anyway, so we've been working with farmers markets since way back in '86.
We've got time for one or maybe two more questions.
Okay, well, you're talking about getting together at cultural events, and one of Hightower's biggest thing always has been how power uses divisive tactics to keep us apart. And Tom, one of your songs that I've always loved is Teenage Immigrant Welfare Mothers on Drugs, who are the cause of all our problems. That's a comment.
We always say about that is, don't fix the problem, fix the blame,
Anyone else have a comment for that?
Alan, I wanted to ask you, I'm not a photographer, I'm a studio artist, a painter, but I'm interested in if you see a relationship between populist or populism, or the style of populist type photography, documentary photography, and maybe contemporary photography, if there's some kind of a relationship happening in terms of those ways of working.
In photography, not art?
Photography.
Photography as opposed to painting. Well, there are groups, the good old Soros Foundation, they fund a lot of things. I get calls from Manchester, England, emails, I should say, the power of the internet. People will email me, students, to ask me questions. Happens all the time. People are very interested. The Farm Security Administration photography, the impact of it has stayed strong over the decades. And so I'm happy about that. Yeah, I do get a lot of calls. And of course, there's no end to the need for advocacy for a whole lot of groups. So what I was trying to point out in my little history of economics of aesthetics is that that's the power that pushes young people away from documentary style photography, because if you want to be seen in galleries, well, alienation, and also pictures that mean anything to anyone, but they don't really mean anything at all. You know, it's kind of like one big ink blot up there. Strange, odd moments, that's what some of the people were you know, being shown in the Museum of Modern Art for. But I still get some young people that come by and want to talk and learn and do the things that Russell Lee did. It's not as simple as one might think, and I think that's a great thing about everybody getting out there and planting lettuce in the backyard, is because you find out, golly, you know, it's fun, but it's work. And when you're planting some crops in the Austin Community Gardens and they can't get space quick enough to suit everyone that wants to do it, you do learn all the effort and technique that's necessary, and I think that's helpful for farmers. It makes people appreciate them more. And when I teach photography to people, they always say, well, gosh darn, there's more to this than I thought. And I said, that's right.
Any last comments? Thank you, Alan. Any?
I was just thinking, this is sort of reminds me of the old Presbyterian church I came to. Just one person on the front row. It's kind of makes you want to break into a gospel song. You know?
It does. Well, folks, I want to thank all of you all for being here. Beverly, I believe, has a few words, but I want to thank this panel again, and thank you, Jim. Thank you all for being here today.